watched this relationship very closely over the years. Ma'am, thank you so much for joining us on a very important day for India and for India-US ties. Let me begin by asking you this. Ambassador Syed Akbaruddin, who was with us on the show just a minute ago, says that according to him, this could in fact emerge as the defining partnership of this century. Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor of the United States, has expressed his sentiments in similar words, saying that this is going to be one of the defining partnerships of our times. Is that an assessment you agree with, ma'am?
I think this is an extremely important relationship. I am glad that it is coming into fruition in the manner that has been taking place over several years. How it will develop going forward within this century or the next remains to be seen, but I think all the pointers are most promising, and I do hope that the assessments and approaches of governments from India and from the United States put the substance into it that would in effect make it as significant as the speakers you referred to have said.
All right, ma'am, as we speak, we can see President Joe Biden and the First Lady, Dr. Jill Biden. They have arrived. They're waiting for the guest of honor, Prime Minister Narendra Modi, to arrive. Of course, we are witnessing a glorious spectacle here with Prime Minister Narendra Modi as a state visitor. He is going to be accorded a ceremonial welcome complete with a 21-gun salute, and I believe the Prime Minister has just arrived. Let's stay on these visuals. Ma'am, give me just a couple of minutes. I will come back to you. But this is a historic moment, ladies and gentlemen. This is Prime Minister Narendra Modi's very first state visit. There you have it. The man of the moment.
Welcome to US. Welcome to US.
People are chanting Modi, welcome to US, Modi.
Distinguished guests, the national anthem of the Republic of India, followed by the national anthem of the United States.
Modi magic.
Mr. President, this concludes the honors. Distinguished guests, the President of the United States.
Welcome, Mr. Prime Minister. Welcome back to the White House. I've long believed that the relationship between the United States and India is will be one of the defining relationships of the 21st century. Two proud nations whose love of freedom secured our independence, bound by the same words in our Constitution. First three words, we the people. The enduring ties and shared values between our people and the shared responsibility as global leaders to tackle the great issues of our time together.
स्वागत है प्रधानमंत्री जी आपका पुनः आपका लौटने के लिए मैंने हमेशा विश्वास किया है कि संयुक्त राज्य अमेरिका और भारत के मध्य यह रिश्ता 21वीं सदी के परिभाषित संबंधों में से एक है। दो गौरवशाली राष्ट्र, हम इन तथ्यों से बंधे हैं और यहाँ हमारी स्वाधीनता के प्रेम से ही हमने अपनी स्वतंत्रता प्राप्त की है। हमारे जो तथ्य हैं वो हमारे संविधान के पहले शब्द यही हैं, हम देश के नागरिक, हमारे लोगों के बीच स्थायी संबंध और साझे मूल्य और वर्तमान के महान मुद्दों से निपटने के लिए वैश्विक नेताओं के रूप में हमारी साझी जिम्मेदारी।
I'm honored to be the first to have you here in 15 years. The United States is honoring and hosting an official visit to the Republic of India. Prime Minister Modi, welcome back to the White House.
मैं सम्मानित हूँ कि लगभग 15 वर्षों में पहली बार संयुक्त राज्य अमेरिका भारत गणराज्य के लिए एक आधिकारिक राजकीय यात्रा की मेजबानी कर रहा है। प्रधानमंत्री मोदी जी, व्हाइट हाउस में आपका स्वागत है।
We spent a lot of time together going back to when I was vice president and you had just become prime minister. And since I've become president, we've continued a relationship built on mutual trust, candor, and respect. The challenges and opportunities facing the world in this century require that India and the United States work and lead together, and we are.
बहुत समय एक साथ बिताया है, उस समय से जब मैं उपराष्ट्रपति था और आप अभी प्रधानमंत्री बने थे, और जब से मैं राष्ट्रपति बना हूँ हमेशा इस रिश्ते को जारी रखा है हमने। और जहाँ हमारा इसमें आपसी विश्वास, स्पष्टवादिता और सम्मान है। इस सदी में जो चुनौतियां और अवसर विश्व के सामने हैं, यह आवश्यक है कि भारत और अमेरिका एक साथ काम करें और नेतृत्व करें, और हम कर रहे हैं।
With your partnership, we've invigorated and elevated the Quad between the United States, India, Australia, and Japan to advance our vision of a free, open, secure, and prosperous Indo-Pacific. Decades from now, people will look back and say, the Quad bent the arc of history toward global good, as the Prime Minister describes it.
आपकी साझेदारी के साथ हमने एक मुक्त, खुला, सुरक्षित और समृद्ध हिंद प्रशांत की दृष्टि को आगे बढ़ाने के लिए संयुक्त राज्य अमेरिका, भारत, ऑस्ट्रेलिया और जापान के मध्य क्वाड को मजबूत और उन्नत किया है। अब से दशकों बाद लोग पीछे मुड़कर देखेंगे और कहेंगे, क्वाड ने इतिहास के वृत्तचाप को वैश्विक हित की ओर मोड़ दिया, जैसा कि प्रधानमंत्री इसका वर्णन करते हैं।
Together, India and the United States are working closely on everything from ending poverty and expanding access to health care, to addressing climate change, to tackling food and energy insecurity stoked by Russia's unprovoked war in Ukraine.
साथ साथ भारत और संयुक्त राज्य अमेरिका हर विषय पर मिलकर काम कर रहे हैं, जैसे कि गरीबी को समाप्त करना और स्वास्थ्य देखभाल तक पहुंच का विस्तार, जलवायु संकट को संबोधित करने से लेकर खाद्य और ऊर्जा असुरक्षा से निपटना, जो यूक्रेन पर रूस के कारण युद्ध से प्रभावित हुआ।
We made critical and emerging technologies the pillar of our next generation partnership to ensure that these technologies promote and protect our values, remain open, accessible, and trusted and secure.
हमने महत्वपूर्ण और उभरती प्रौद्योगिकियों को अपनी अपनी पीढ़ी की साझेदारी का एक स्तंभ बनाया है, यह सुनिश्चित करने के लिए कि इन प्रौद्योगिकियों हमारे द्वारा हमारे मूल्यों को बढ़ावा और सुरक्षा मिलेगी और यह खुले, सुलभ, विश्वसनीय और सुरक्षित रहेंगी।
All this matters for America, for India, and for the world. We face an inflection point, one of those moments that only come around every several generations, when so much is changing technologically, politically, socially, and environmentally, that the decisions we make today are going to determine our future for decades to come.
यह सब बहुत महत्वपूर्ण है अमेरिका के लिए, भारत के लिए और सारे विश्व के लिए। हम एक मोड़ का सामना कर रहे हैं, ऐसे क्षण जो हर कई पीढ़ियों में केवल एक बार आते हैं, जहां बहुत कुछ परिवर्तित हो रहा है, तकनीकी रूप से, राजनीतिक रूप से, सामाजिक रूप से और पर्यावरण की दृष्टि से, कि आज हम जो निर्णय लेंगे वह आने वाले दशकों के लिए भविष्य का निर्धारण करेंगे।
And as democracies, we can better tap into the full talent of all of our people and attract investments as true and trusted partners as leading nations, with our greatest export being the power of our example. Equity under the law, freedom of expression, religious pluralism, and diversity of our people. These core principles have endured and evolved even as they have faced challenges throughout each of our nation's histories, and will fuel our strength, depth, and future.
लोकतंत्र के इस रूप में हमने सभी लोगों की पूर्ण प्रतिभा का बेहतर तरीके से लाभ उठाया है और हम उठा सकते हैं, और अग्रणी देशों के रूप में सच्चे और विश्वसनीय भागीदारों के रूप में निवेश को आकर्षित कर सकते हैं। हमारा सबसे बड़ा निर्यात हमारे उदाहरण की शक्ति है। कानून के तहत समानता, अभिव्यक्ति की स्वतंत्रता, धार्मिक बहुलवाद, हमारे लोगों की विविधता, ये मूल सिद्धांत दृढ़ हैं और विकसित हुए हैं, यहाँ तक कि जब उन्हें चुनौतियों का सामना करना पड़ा है हमारे प्रत्येक देश के इतिहास में, और दूर भविष्य तक हमारी ताकत को ये ऊर्जा प्रदान करेंगे।
And they form a special bond among our nations, forged by the special bond among our people, based on values that are universal, a duty to family and elders, treating all people with respect and dignity, a premium on education and creativity, self-discipline, hard work, entrepreneurship, faith and service to community, courage and resilience, and tolerance and opportunity for all.
और ये हमारे राष्ट्रों के बीच एक विशेष बंधन बनाते हैं, हमारे लोगों के बीच विशेष बंधन द्वारा निर्मित उन मूल्यों पर आधारित जो सार्वभौमिक हैं, परिवार और बड़ों के प्रति कर्तव्य, सभी लोगों के साथ सम्मान और गरिमा के साथ व्यवहार, शिक्षा और रचनात्मक पर बढ़ोतरी, आत्म अनुशासन, कड़ी मेहनत और उद्यमशीलता, विश्वास और समुदाय के लिए सेवा, साहस और लचीलापन, सहिष्णुता और अवसर।
I've seen this dynamism in my visits to India. I see it in Indian American diaspora that reflects every part of American life and remains a bridge between our nations and only grows stronger with each generation. We see it with record numbers of Indian Americans serving in the United States Congress. We see it here at the White House, where proud Americans with Indian heritage serve our country every day, including our Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris.
में यह गतिशीलता देखी है। मैं इसे भारतीय अमेरिकी प्रवासियों में देखता हूँ, जो अमेरिकी जीवन के हर भाग को दर्शाता है, और हमारे राष्ट्रों के बीच एक पुल बना हुआ है जो प्रत्येक पीढ़ी के साथ निरंतर मजबूत होता है। हम इसे संयुक्त राज्य कांग्रेस में बड़ी संख्या में देखते हैं, और हम इसे यहाँ व्हाइट हाउस में देखते हैं, जहाँ भारतीय विरासत के साथ गर्वित अमेरिकी हर दिन हमारे देश की सेवा कर रहे हैं, और जिनमें उपराष्ट्रपति कमला हैरिस भी शामिल हैं।
The granddaughter, the proud granddaughter of Indian civil servant, daughter of an Indian student, turned American scientist, who came to the United States when she was only 19 years old to pursue her dream of curing cancer. A family like so many of ours in our nation that speaks of the thousand stories of determination, courage, and hope.
एक भारतीय समाज सेवक की पोती, एक भारतीय छात्र जो अमेरिकी वैज्ञानिक बनी, जो 19 साल की उम्र में संयुक्त राज्य अमेरिका आई थी कैंसर के इलाज के अपने सपने को साकार करने के लिए, उनकी बेटी। हमारे देशों में बहुत सारे परिवारों में से एक जो हजारों दृढ़ संकल्प, साहस और आशा की कहानियां कहते हैं।
Stories that define the relationship and the limitless possibilities between the United States and India, two great nations, two great friends, two great powers that can define the course of the 21st century. Mr. Prime Minister, thank you for your partnership, and I'll turn it over to you.
परिभाषित करने वाली कहानियां और संयुक्त राज्य अमेरिका और भारत के मध्य असीम संभावनाएं, दो महान राष्ट्र दो अच्छे मित्र, दो महान शक्तियां, यह 21वीं सदी के पाठ्यक्रम को परिभाषित करेगा। माननीय प्रधानमंत्री जी, आपकी साझेदारी के लिए धन्यवाद। अब मैं आपको सौंपता हूं।
Distinguished guests, the Prime Minister of the Republic of India.
राष्ट्रपति बाइडेन, फर्स्ट लेडी डॉक्टर जिल बाइडेन, डिस्टिंग्विश्ड गेस्ट, उमंग और उत्साह से भरे हुए इंडियन अमेरिकन मेरे प्यारे साथियों, आप सबको नमस्कार। सबसे पहले तो मैं राष्ट्रपति बाइडेन के मित्रतापूर्ण स्वागत और दीर्घदृष्टिपूर्ण संबोधन के लिए उनका हृदय से बहुत बहुत आभार व्यक्त करता हूं। थैंक यू प्रेसिडेंट बाइडेन फॉर योर फ्रेंडशिप।
President Biden, First Lady Dr. Jill Biden, distinguished guests, friends from the Indian American community filled with energy and excitement, a very good morning to all of you. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude to President Biden for his warm welcome and his far-sighted speech. Thank you, President Biden, for your friendship.
Friends, आज व्हाइट हाउस में शानदार स्वागत समारोह के एक प्रकार से ये भारत के 140 करोड़ देशवासियों का सम्मान है, 140 करोड़ देशवासियों का गौरव है। ये सम्मान अमेरिका में रहने वाले 4 मिलियन से अधिक भारतीय मूल के लोगों का भी सम्मान है। इस सम्मान के लिए मैं राष्ट्रपति बाइडेन और डॉक्टर जिल बाइडेन का उनके प्रति हृदय से बहुत बहुत आभार व्यक्त करता हूं।
Friends, this grand welcome ceremony at the White House today is an honor and pride for 1.4 billion people of India. This is also an honor for more than 4 million people of Indian origin living in the US. For this honor, I express my heartfelt gratitude to President Biden and Dr. Jill Biden.
Friends, करीब 3 दशक पहले एक साधारण नागरिक के रूप में मैं अमेरिका यात्रा पर आया था और उस समय मैंने व्हाइट हाउस को बाहर से देखा था। प्रधानमंत्री बनने के बाद तो मैं स्वयं तो कई बार यहां पर आया हूं, लेकिन इतनी बड़ी संख्या में इंडियन अमेरिकन समुदाय के लिए व्हाइट हाउस के द्वार आज पहली बार खोले गए हैं।
Friends, about 3 decades ago, I came on a visit to America as a common man. At that time, I had seen the White House from outside. After becoming the Prime Minister, I have come here many times, but today for the first time, the doors of the White House have been opened for the Indian American community in such large numbers.
भारतीय समुदाय के लोग अपने टैलेंट, कर्मठता और निष्ठा से अमेरिका में भारत की शान बढ़ा रहे हैं। आप सब हमारे संबंधों की असली ताकत है।
आज आपको दिए गए सम्मान के लिए मैं राष्ट्रपति बाइडेन और डॉक्टर जिल बाइडेन का हृदय से अभिनंदन करता हूं। उनका जितना धन्यवाद करो उतना कम है।
The people of the Indian community are enhancing India's glory in the US through their talent, hard work, and dedication. You are the real strength of our relationship. I thank President Biden and Dr. Jill Biden for the honor you've been given today. I think I can't thank him enough for this.
Friends, भारत और अमेरिका दोनों के समाज और व्यवस्थाएं लोकतांत्रिक मूल्यों पर आधारित है। दोनों देशों के संविधान, उसके पहले 3 शब्द और जैसा राष्ट्रपति बाइडेन ने भी जिसका उल्लेख किया, वी द पीपल, हम दोनों देश अपनी विविधता पर गर्व करते हैं। हम सर्वजन हिताय सर्वजन सुखाय इस मूलभूत सिद्धांत में विश्वास रखते हैं।
The societies and institutions of both India and the US are based on democratic values. The constitutions of both countries begin with the following 3 words: we, the people, as President Biden just mentioned. Both of our countries take pride in their diversity. Both of us believe in the fundamental principle of in the interest of all, for the welfare of all.
पोस्ट कोविड काल में वर्ल्ड ऑर्डर एक नया रूप ले रहा है। इस कालखंड में भारत और अमेरिका की मित्रता पूरे विश्व के सामर्थ्य को बढ़ाने में पूरक होगी। ग्लोबल गुड के लिए, वैश्विक शांति, स्थिरता और समृद्धि के लिए दोनों देश साथ मिलकर काम करने के लिए प्रतिबद्ध है। हमारी मजबूत स्ट्रेटेजिक पार्टनरशिप डेमोक्रेसी की ताकत का स्पष्ट प्रमाण है।
In the post-COVID era, the world order is taking a new shape. In this time period, the friendship between India and the US will be instrumental in enhancing the strength of the whole world. The two countries are committed to work together for the global good and for global peace, stability, and prosperity. Our strong strategic partnership is a clear proof of the power of democracy.
Friends, अब से कुछ ही देर में राष्ट्रपति बाइडेन और मैं भारत अमेरिका संबंधों और अन्य क्षेत्रीय और वैश्विक मुद्दों पर विस्तार से बातचीत करेंगे। मुझे विश्वास है कि हमेशा की तरह आज भी हमारी बातचीत बहुत सकारात्मक और उपयोगी रहेगी। आज दोपहर को मुझे यूएस कांग्रेस को एक बार फिर से संबोधित करने का अवसर मिलेगा। इस सम्मान के लिए मैं आपका हृदय से आभारी हूं।
Friends, in a short while from now, President Biden and I will discuss India-US relations and various regional and global issues. I'm sure that, as always, our conversation today will be very positive and useful. This afternoon, I will also have an opportunity to address the US Congress for a second time. I am deeply grateful for this honor.
मैं यही कामना करता हूं और 140 करोड़ भारतवासी भी यही कामना करते हैं कि भारत का तिरंगा और अमेरिका का स्टार एंड स्ट्राइप्स हमेशा नई ऊंचाइयां छूते रहे। राष्ट्रपति बाइडेन, डॉक्टर जिल बाइडेन, एक बार फिर आपके स्नेह भरे निमंत्रण के लिए, आपके गर्मजोशी भरे स्वागत और आतिथ्य सत्कार के लिए मैं आपका और 140 करोड़ हिंदुस्तान वासियों की तरफ से आभार प्रकट करता हूं। जय हिंद। गॉड ब्लेस अमेरिका। बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद।
I wish for, and the 1.4 billion people of India wish with me, for India's tricolor and America's stars and stripes to always keep flying higher and higher. President Biden, Dr. Jill Biden, once again, I thank you for your kind invitation, for your warm welcome and hospitality, also on behalf of 1.4 billion people of India. Jai Hind, God bless America. Thank you very much.
I was going and meeting the people.
Mr. President, let's conclude the ceremony.
All right, a grand ceremonial welcome there for Prime Minister Narendra Modi at the White House. A lot of excitement with thousands of Indian Americans having gathered on the south lawns of the White House to witness this grand and glorious spectacle. Certainly a very big moment for India and for the India-US relationship. As we stay on these visuals, let me introduce our guests. With us on the show at this point is Ambassador Leela Punappa, former Deputy National Security Advisor of India. Also joining me at this point is Suhasini Haidar, National and Diplomatic Editor of The Hindu. Thank you so much to both of you for joining us. Ambassador Punappa, if I could start with you. President Biden there saying, two great nations, two great friends, two great powers, two proud nations that share the words "we the people" in their constitutions. He says the India-US ties will define the 21st century. Prime Minister Modi is saying the grand welcome that he's received today at the White House is an honor for 140 crore Indians. Your thoughts, ma'am, on what you've heard so far from the two leaders?
I missed that last bit, Neha.
Prime Minister Modi is saying the grand welcome that he has received at the White House today is essentially an honor and a matter of pride for 140 crore Indian, and this is the first time that the gates of the White House have been opened to the Indian community in the United States.
Well, there's no question that the ceremony was impressive, as such welcoming ceremonies are. In fact, the one that we provide honored visitors outside Rashtrapati Bhavan is magnificent. I think both leaders tried to place the visit in context in terms of what the expectations were on either side. The Prime Minister, of course, spoke about the honor done to not just 140 over a billion Indians, but also the Indian American community in the United States, which has contributed so much to American life in all sectors. President Biden's comments, I thought, went into a little more detail, and I think he tried to place the visit in context, recalling that it was 15 years ago that a similar state visit from India had taken place. I believe that would have been in 2008 in the visit of Dr. Manmohan Singh when Barack Obama was the president. He also talked about the Quad, interestingly, and about the new pathways for Indian-American partnership, particularly in the areas of critical and emerging technologies. He talked about the changes that have taken place in the world order, also spoke at some length about democracy and social diversity in all respects. But I do believe that the attempt from both leaders was really to set the basis for the discussion that is now going to take place. And of course, in terms of the outcome, we will have to wait for any joint statement that might be issued.
Absolutely. And what's also interesting is that the White House has already said that the two leaders are going to address a press conference, and Prime Minister Narendra Modi also will take questions. So, Hasini, I wonder if you have thoughts on that and on what you've heard the two leaders say. President Biden saying the India-US relationship will define the 21st century. Of course, he talked about shared values, the two countries being two great democracies and powers, two pride nations that share the words "we the people" in their constitutions. And as Ambassador Punappa pointed out, he talked about the Quad, he talked about ISET. So in a sense, these opening remarks by President Biden setting the agenda for the broad-based bilateral talks that are now going to take place between the two sides at the White House.
Yes, absolutely. And a state visit, as Ms. Punappa said, is really about the kind of pomp and ceremony you just saw. Just to correct, the last time the Prime Minister of India was invited for a state visit was Prime Minister Manmohan Singh in 2009, but he was invited twice because he was also invited in 2005 by then President George Bush. As far as the talks now go, I think the agenda has been set out, as you said. President Biden talking about the fact that they're going to work together on technology. We've already heard about the MOU being signed between GE, General Electric, and Hindustan Aeronautical Limited, HAL, for those 414 jet engines. We still are waiting to see some of the fine print on that deal, but it certainly promises to be, if there is a substantial transfer of technology, a real game changer in ties. We're also waiting to hear about the announcement. I think it's already more or less done unofficially, for India to purchase Predator drones from the United States, and for an investment package by Micron for semiconductor industry in India. So those are some of the big highlighted items between them. We'll also see announcements on health cooperation, education, H-1B visas, I think, an Indus-X partnership, so a kind of cooperation where the two countries can constantly coordinate with each other when it comes to high tech, when it comes to things like even quantum computing and artificial intelligence, and other kinds of cooperation between the two countries. I think a joint statement will set out exactly what has happened in this particular visit. And as you pointed out, the two leaders are expected at the end of their conversation not to hold a press conference, but to take two questions, I think one from the American side and one from the Indian side. It'll certainly put a lot of pressure on whoever is going to be asking those questions. Because it is a rare chance, as you pointed out. Prime Minister Modi does not actually normally take questions while he's traveling, or in fact, even in India. So this is a rare opportunity.
You're right. I may not want to be in the shoes of that journalist. It would be too much pressure actually getting to put a question directly to Prime Minister Narendra Modi. But yes, this is going to happen at the end of these bilateral talks. So Hasini, you talked about some of the big ticket items that are on the agenda. We know that GE and Hindustan Aeronautics Limited have already signed an MOU for, what is being described as the game-changing fighter jet engine and technology transfer deal. Of course, like you said, that God is in the detail, and to what extent that technology transfer is going to take place, we don't know that yet. What we're also given to understand is that a major deal with Micron, the semiconductor company, is going to, in fact, take place, with Micron being invited by Prime Minister Narendra Modi himself to set up a semiconductor unit in India. Of course, there is that huge Predator drone deal worth $3.5 billion that's on the cards. Apart from that, it's already been announced, Suhasini, correct me if I'm wrong, that India is all set to join the Artemis Accords, a US-led effort to send humans back to the moon by 2025. What I'm also picking up at this point is that some new H-1B visa processing changes are going to be announced, and the two countries are likely to set up new consulates. In India, the US is likely to set up two new consulates in Bengaluru and Ahmedabad, and India could set up a new consulate in Seattle in the US. Could you share some more with us on those some of those issues?
Yeah, correct. In fact, on the people-to-people ties, you will be seeing announcements on visas, because, of course, that is a very important part of the relationship that it has become. What the US has announced is a new pilot program, particularly for H-1B visa holders, that they will not have to leave the United States in order to renew their visas, because this has always been very disruptive. So that's one announcement expected to be made, and to cover H-1B and I think even what are called skilled visas by 2024. We're also expecting the US to announce new consulates for Bengaluru and for Ahmedabad, and for India to reopen a consulate in Seattle and possibly one other place. As far as the Artemis Accords go, this is a grouping of about 25 countries that have signed on. Yes, the moon mission is a part of it, although it's still unclear what part of the cooperation India will be in. Of course, it will be a new step for India and the US if that were the case. So far, there's been a lot of cooperation, of course, with Russia on space in particular, but in the last few years, we've seen more on China. In terms of the big deal that you were talking about for the jet engine technology, remember, this isn't the first time a deal like this has been discussed. I think for much of the last decade, from about 2010 or 2012 to 2019, the two sides discussed the transfer of technology for jet engines under what was called the DTTI. That was shelved in 2019. And has now been picked up with a lot of enthusiasm, with the idea that the US is now willing to share with India technology it has not been prepared to do in the past. So as I said, if the deal comes to its fruition, once we know exactly how much technology transfer is involved, once we know how much congressional approval has already been taken or is likely to go through, then we can safely say that this is in fact the big piece of the pie in this particular visit.
You're quite right, Suhasini. There is a lot of talk about how there could be as much as 80 to 100% technology transfer. And that could very well emerge as the defining feature, not just of this historic state visit, but of the India-US relationship itself going forward, given that there are many firsts involved here. Of course, let's not forget that there is the Russia factor also. The US is very keen to wean India off its huge dependence on Russian weapon supplies. But Ambassador Punappa, let's dwell on this. The reason why this technology transfer deal and the fighter jet engine deal is being referred to as a game changer is because, one, it is seen as the holy grail of military aviation. Two, many are saying that never before has the United States shared what it describes as the crown jewel of its defense capabilities with a non-ally. It's willing to do that with India. Do you believe that this is a true reflection of just how important this relationship is now to the United States?
It has pulled out all the ceremonial and other stops in terms of projecting this visit as a major event speaks for itself. And I think it's important to see what is happening really as a continuum of how India-US relations have grown, particularly over the past few decades. In one sense, what were called the kick-lighter proposals in the early 2000s, it was in the 1990s, sort of set the bedrock for the start of substantive defense cooperation between India and the United States, but in a kind of limited manner, military exercises and such like. You then got a very steady progression of agreements for further defense cooperation in various areas. Now, if you recall, when Barack Obama made his first visit to India as president, there was a major defense deal that was signed at that time. He had just seen the Democrats suffer in midterm congressional elections at the time, but he projected this as one of the major achievements of his visit. Around the same time, the discussions on the civil nuclear cooperation were taking place and finally resulted in the United States issuing the waiver and with full political support through the US Congress for a civil nuclear partnership with India. And now we come to what I would really consider the next stage. In fact, when Foreign Secretary Quatra briefed the press, he talked about this being a milestone. And what does a milestone represents the fact that some ground has been traversed and there is more to go. I would say that the highway is somewhat wider at the moment. Maybe the milestones are coming closer to each other. There are some very critical issues that have been identified at a time of major changes in the global world order. And here it's not just the geopolitics, but the geoeconomics and the integration of the two. The pandemic has showed it to us. The shortage on semiconductors, the whole issue of supply chains have brought this out. Now, there are a few big ticket items. I might tell you that the Micron deal is not the first time that chip technology was due to come to India. Way back in the 1980s, American Micro Devices had signed a deal with Semiconductor Complex in Chandigarh, which burnt down. And it has taken us this many years now to get going once again on developing this essential technology for anything to do with the progression of electronics in terms of artificial intelligence, in terms of telecom and data processing. So there's much that is on the table. I think there will be challenges for both countries in terms of delivery and implementation. The United States has a very tough regulatory framework, even for not just partners, but for allies, which has to go through a progression of clearances within their system and sometimes also through the US Congress. So there is that. For India, it will be a question of putting in place the systems, predictability, precision. No room for jugaad over here when you're talking about these high technologies. And then developing the engagement that in fact does exist between our scientific communities, between our academic communities. On space, we talked about space. You know, ISRO has been cooperating internationally, including with NASA, for a long time. But what is now happening is that some of these are getting an institutional footing. And this really is what will provide strength to not just the defining relationship, but what Barack Obama termed the indispensable relationship when he spoke to Parliament here several years ago. So, work in progress, much to be done, but the optics are right. The devil is in the detail, or you said the God is in the detail. And we will then have to wait for the substance to emerge. But I do believe that both sides have a meeting of minds, and this needs to be built on.
It certainly is being built on. I think that is quite evident from, this historic state visit that is taking place. On that note, Ambassador Leela Ponappa, ma'am, always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective and time with us on, of course, what is a historic day for the India-US relationship. Suhasini, coming back to you at this point, before we get into specific issues, and there is a lot to deconstruct here, let's look at the big picture for a moment. Now, US Ambassador to India, Eric Garcetti, has said, and I'm quoting him here, this is what history feels like. This relationship is positively past the point of no return. We have more than 100 deliverables. It's an all-arena partnership. The momentum is unstoppable. And then you have everyone from National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan to President Biden himself saying this is going to be one of the defining partnerships of our age. You know, I'm tempted to go back in time. You might agree that President Bill Clinton's visit to India all the way back in 2000 in many ways signaled the beginning of a new chapter in the India-US relationship. And then let's not forget the historic civil nuclear deal that was signed under President George W. Bush and Prime Minister Manmohan Singh in 2005. It truly took the India-US relationship to the next level. Now, looking at what's happening today through the prism of recent history, would you say that Prime Minister Modi's state visit, in a sense, is a coming of age of the India-US relationship? How would you define it?
I think this has been a relationship that has grown year on year since the period you described when President Clinton came to India. And remember, it went to possibly one of its worst points in 1998 after India tested
the nuclear tests.
When the US sanctioned India and all the rest. So from there, it has been one after another years of good relationships getting better every year. Some years, not so much, some years a little less, but actually there's been a steady secular increase in ties between the two countries. So I'd say this is yet another milestone, as Foreign Secretary Vinay Quatra put it. Remember, the 2005 visit of Prime Minister Manmohan Singh was important when the nuclear deal was first signed. The state visit in 2009 was equally important. I think there was Prime Minister Modi's visit to the US in 2014 that saw a kind of a reigniting of ties, if you like, between him and President Obama, who then came to India. So we've seen a series of these visits. Obviously, when a visit is underway, it always seems like the biggest thing ever. But yes, I mean, and even Prime Minister Modi saying that, this is the first time he's seen Indian Americans on the South Lawns. Actually, they've been there before. But it is important that he is there, that they are there in such large numbers, and the India-US relationship is being reaffirmed once again. Now, when it comes to the specifics, as I said, this particular visit will be remembered for the jet engine deal if all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed, simply because one of the big, perhaps, thorns between India and the US has been the idea that the US is reluctant to transfer technology for production in India. And this has been an Indian demand over the decades, or certainly as long as India and the US have been discussing defense purchases of this kind. As I said, an entire decade went in from 2010 to 2019 discussing this under the DTTI, and then was shelved. So if this does go through, it will be for all the discussions that have been had in the past as well. But it will take relations to the next level or open a new chapter, certainly in ties between the two countries.
Right. I keep saying that the transfer of technology is perhaps going to emerge as the defining feature of this state visit and perhaps of the India-US relationship itself, because as Suhasini very rightly points out, this has been a huge irritant in the relationship. Many believe that we're crossing new frontiers with this. On that note, let me also welcome Professor Scott Lucas, who joins us at this point, foreign affairs expert. Thank you very much, Professor Lucas, for joining us at this point. I will be with you in just a moment, but Suhasini, I need to ask you another important question. Yes, this is a bilateral, relationship that we're talking about, where primarily it's bilateral issues that are going to be in focus, but we'll have to address the elephant in the room, which is China. Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, has already in fact said that yes, Beijing is going to come up. Beijing flexing its muscle in the Indo-Pacific region is going to come up. China's role in the military, economic, technology domains will be on the agenda when the two leaders meet. So I'd like your perspective on this. To what extent do you think China is bringing India and the United States closer to each other? And do you believe that the US sees India as a strategic counterweight to China?
Well, there's no question that India is seen as the only country in the region that can provide any kind of countervailing balance to a country like China. India is now the country with the largest population. It has a fast-growing economy, and it is a strategic power. So I don't think that is in any way overstated. Since 2017, when the Quad was revived, certainly it has been seen as one vehicle of trying to offer counters to China, not as much as to contain China, but to offer counters to China within the region as part of a strategy between India, the US, Australia, and Japan. How much will China be discussed during this visit? There's no question that since 2020, the presence of Chinese troops at the LAC, the kind of incursions we've seen, the kind of losses India has faced in Galwan, these are all issues of continuing concern for India. It's a 3,500 kilometer boundary with China that India has to constantly now monitor. But the fact is that so far no government has openly actually discussed China in the context of another bilateral relationship. So it'll be important to see how it comes out, whether it comes out in the public comments between them. There's no question on the US side, they're very open about the fact that they want to discuss China with India. But Prime Minister Modi has been more reticent, has not actually made it clear that China is a problem for India beyond the bilateral, or so far that's not something that he has articulated in so many words. So you're right, this is going to be an area where everyone will be watching very closely, is how much is Prime Minister Modi willing to say when he comes out of these talks with President Biden.
Well, clearly, you talk about Prime Minister Modi's reticence with regard to China. No such problem for President Biden, Suhasini, who's called Xi Jinping a dictator. Some have said he's probably gone off script, not for the first time. And you've already seen a very sharp reaction from Beijing, calling his remarks utterly irresponsible and a gross violation of diplomatic protocol. So even as it would seem like relations between the US and China are going south, despite Antony Blinken's visit to Beijing over the weekend, the two sides have agreed that they will continue meeting and continue talking. Some have suggested, Suhasini, and I wonder what your thoughts on this are before I go to Professor Scott Lucas. Some have said that, while Prime Minister Modi is in that room with President Biden, and as we speak, we're looking at the two leaders talking at the White House, would it be a good idea for India to actually seek some sort of clarity from the United States on how far Washington wants to go in amending its ties or amending, things in its strained relationship with China? Do you believe that that is a matter of concern for India in any way, even as the US rolls out the red carpet for Prime Minister Modi?
Well, I think for India, that has made it clear that it does not want to get involved in big power politics. It does not want to have to choose sides. Prime Minister Modi says again and again in the context of US and Russia that India is on the side of peace. I think that is more or less the public statement when it comes to China as well. Regardless of India's, as I said, misgivings over what China has, threatened over the LAC over the last 3 years. But I do think that that behind closed doors, a very sobering sort of discussion will be held over the kind of threat perception there is in the region. What are the kind of ways of maybe reducing tensions in the region as well? And I'm sure both sides will have ideas on that. Another elephant in the room, if you like, and it's been discussed so much that that it's worth mentioning, is the idea of whether the US is going to, because the US makes it clear that one of the reasons for that good relationship is shared values and two democratic countries coming together. Now, in the last few days, we have heard from inside the US, from the Democratic Party, from the Congress, concerns about democratic backsliding in India. And the question will also be, is that going to be something President Biden is going to raise in any shape or form? What's interesting is the maximum pressure is coming to him from within his own party. People like Senator Bernie Sanders. There was a whole group of Congress women who have said that they will boycott Prime Minister Modi's speech at the joint sessions of Congress tomorrow. So the question is going to be, is President Biden going to put those aside and continue to talk only about his relationship with India and the bilateral relationship, or is he going to let this elephant into the room as well?
Definitely another elephant in the room, because 75 members of the US Senate and House of Representatives have written this letter to President Biden, the letter that Suhasini just referred to, saying that President Biden should raise with Prime Minister Modi areas of concern such as press and religious freedoms in India and the country's human rights record. And what is interesting is that National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan didn't shy away from commenting on this issue. He, in fact, has said on record that President Biden will raise US concerns about democratic backsliding in India. However, he will not lecture Prime Minister Modi on the subject. He said, when we see challenges to press, religious or other freedoms, we make our views known. So it'll be interesting how this comes up in these talks. So Suhasini, stay on with us. Let me get a word in from Professor Scott Lucas at this point. Professor Lucas, if I could ask you to step back and look at the big picture, what we are witnessing right now, many would say, is a moment in history. This state visit by Prime Minister Modi to the United States is being described as a historic one that is likely to redefine the India-US relationship. President Biden has already said it is going to be the defining partnership of the 21st century. How do you look at the significance of this visit?
I think in terms of the symbolism, it is historic. I mean, you'll have not only the visit with President Biden, but this is an official state visit in which Prime Minister Modi will address the joint session of U.S. Congress. That's an honor that's given to very few foreign leaders. But in the broader sense, the thing about our times these days is that history keeps being more and more historic each year. Now, this is a key moment, but it is a moment where we're in, let's put it this way, in transition to what might be even greater developments. China has been mentioned, and I think China is significant here. I think you're in the midst of the United States probably trying to realign to a position of competition, not confrontation with China. You don't want a military showdown over Taiwan. You don't want a military showdown over the South China Sea. But in economic and technological competition, you would like India to be working with not only the US economy, but other international economies as China tries to develop its alternative. But even as important as China has been, I think the catalyst that has been missed by a lot of the press here in Europe and indeed in the US has been Ukraine. You might remember that if we had this conversation just a year ago, there was real tension in the US-Indian relationship because the US feared that India would be drawing too close to Moscow, not just a question of not condemning the invasion of Ukraine, but of taking this vast amount of discounted Russian oil. On the other hand, India was concerned that the United States was going to try to bully it into a position of opposition to the Russians. Now that disappeared. That tension disappeared. Why? Because India and the US really came to an agreement on the rules of the game. And that is, okay, India can take a neutral position publicly. The Americans are fine with that. They just don't want Delhi to tilt towards support of the Russians. The Indian government recognizes that. And this visit really consolidates this, that at this pivotal moment over Ukraine, where a Ukrainian counteroffensive is likely, but over months, not over weeks, but over months to defeat the Russians inside Ukraine and cause great problems for the future of Vladimir Putin, you need India to be alongside and cooperating with the international community, for example, humanitarian support for Ukrainian recovery, even if India will never come out and directly condemn Putin's invasion.
That is interesting. So, Hasini, I would like to ask you this question, final question before we let you go. It is well established that India and the United States do not see eye to eye on the Ukraine war and Russia's role in it. Whether it was India's refusal to condemn Russia for its invasion or the fact that India insisted on continuing to import Russian oil. But would it be correct to say that the United States has, in a sense, made its peace with the fact that India is a very strong and important partner, but is not and will not be an ally? India insists on asserting its strategic autonomy. That is not going to change. Therefore, no point expecting monogamy.
I think it is very clear, you put it very well, Neha, that the US has backed down on its decision. About a year ago, we heard a lot of very strong statements coming from the US officials saying there will be consequences for those who help Russia. We hope that India will not buy more Russian oil, and that pleading or sort of certainly asking India publicly to change its vote at the United Nations. India did none of those. In fact, from less than 1% of its oil supplies from Russia last year, today India takes about 40% of its oil supplies from Russia. And I think the US has decided that there is no point in pushing when they are not able to get the results that they desire out of it. And it seems more pragmatic to back down on the issue of the UN or on the issue of India taking a stand, or on the issue of even India inviting the Ukrainian president to address the G20 this year, or the subject of Russian oil. But there is some, I suspect, happiness in American corridors that the idea that Russia's resources are getting more and more drained into this Ukraine war will mean that India is already by force, if not by choice, having to start looking at its options for defense dependence on Russia at a time like this. While neither side will say this publicly, the fact is that if the war in Ukraine continues and Russia needs to divert all of its military resources there, it will be more and more difficult to supply India. We already know that many of the big ticket items, including the S-400 defense systems, are delayed when it comes to supplying to India. So the fact is, regardless of why, whether it is a necessity or a virtue, India is having to reduce its dependence on the Russia relationship for that, in which case the US is, of course, one possible option for India to look at. And there are others. Prime Minister Modi is going to France in a few weeks, expected to announce big ticket defense hardware purchases there as well. But you're right that America has clearly made its peace on this occasion. Remember, it's not always been the case. In 2017, 2018, I remember when President Trump had issued dire threats to anyone continuing their ties with Iran. India had backed down at that point, and the Modi government had decided to cancel all oil and gas purchases from Iran since then. And Iran was India's biggest supplier at a certain time of very cost-effective crude. So the fact is that in this case, I think you're right on the Russia issue. The US has decided to basically work with what it can. And is comfortable with the fact that that the situation as it pans out is perhaps also bringing India and the US closer at assessing what they can do together.
Absolutely, and many believe that this is the long game that the US is willing to play now. So Hasini, as always, an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for your perspective on that whole gamut of issues regarding the India-US relationship on a very, very important day.
Thank you, Neha.
Thank you. At this point, let me introduce our next guest. Former diplomat, Ambassador Ashok Sajjanhar is also with us. Welcome, sir. Great to have you. Professor Scott Lucas is also with us. Ambassador Ashok Sajjanhar, your thoughts on this big visit, you know, the history that we're witnessing now right in front of our eyes, that ceremonial welcome on the south lawns of Prime Minister, on the south lawns of the White House for Prime Minister Narendra Modi, his first ever state visit to the United States. A lot seems to be riding on this visit. President Biden himself has said today that the India-US relationship is going to be the defining partnership of the 21st century. How significant is this visit according to you?
Well, I think it's very significant, Neha. First of all, thank you for having me on your show. I think it's very significant. I think it's going to be transformational. In fact, you know, it brings to mind, I remember I used to be in Washington at that time. Times were just about changing. 2005, when we signed the US-India civil nuclear deal. And just before that, we had the visit of Condoleezza Rice to India. And she had come back and she had said that, the United States would like to see India as a major global power. So I think here also it is that inflection point that I can see that United States would like to do everything to make India into a much more significant power than it already is. It's about $3.5 trillion economy, going to be the fifth largest economy, now going to be the third largest economy, etc., etc. But in a variety of ways, whether it is semiconductors, whether it is transfer of technology, whether it is defense supplies. I remember, in July 2005, we had signed the first defense agreement with the United States. And today, the United States has emerged as possibly the second or the third largest supplier of defense equipment. And now today, we are talking not only in terms of the supply, but also transfer of technology. And of course, you could ask that, similar promises were made, similar discussions were held in 2013-14 when we signed the Defense, Trade and Technology Initiative. But I think times are very different today than they were in 2013-14. I think expectations on both sides were quite different. So coming back to your question and wrapping up my response, I think this is a truly significant visit, truly consequential visit. And the contours are already available. And I think it's going to do a great deal to catapult the relations into the next orbit.
It is going to do a great deal to catapult the relationship into the next orbit. Well, that certainly is the hope that most people have. The expectations from this visit are extremely high. Ambassador Sajjanhar says that this is an inflection point in the India-US relationship. Professor Lucas, let me come back to you at this point. You know, one of the primary reasons why people believe that this is indeed an inflection point for this bilateral relationship is not only because the Prime Minister Modi is on his first state visit to the US, or the fact that he's only the third world leader who has been invited by the Biden administration for a state visit to the US. But the primary reason is, the transfer of technology that we're now likely to witness as part of the GE F414 fighter jet engine deal. That is what is truly path-breaking because, as has been pointed out by many, America's refusal to part with sensitive technology and share it with India in the past has been a very thorny issue. Once this deal goes through, it will be a thing of the past. And in fact, there are those who've pointed out that the US has never gone this far, sharing this kind of technology with a non-ally. And this reflects just how significant the United States believes this relationship is today.
Ambassador noted we had been on that path with the 2005 and the 2013 agreements. But I think, again, we come back to what is the catalyst here in 2023. And that is, as you've talked about in your discussion earlier, India has historically relied upon Russia for much of its defense equipment and its defense technology. Not just the United States, but other countries such as France, which Prime Minister Modi will be visiting, want to bring India away from that relationship with Russia, precisely because of the Ukraine conflict, and bring it into cooperating with the West. And so the General Electric Agreement to provide these jet engines is important, as is the reports that the United States will begin providing military drones, naval military drones to India. But in addition, to take it beyond the military, realize that we're not just talking about a bilateral relationship. We're talking about the US and India within important regional and global dynamics. This is a 21st century global economy, which is rapidly developing in terms of technology, but that poses both opportunities and challenges. In addition, we face the challenges such as climate change, such as the post-pandemic question about adequate health care, such as the question of economic inequality. And when you look at this, if you focus too closely just on being, quote, anti-China or anti-Russia, you miss those big issues. So I think you're going to see the United States talking to India, and you're going to see India talking to the United States, but you need to think about who else they are talking to over these next few years. If indeed we finally get a coherent Asian approach. And I have to be honest with you, that as important as this visit is, and as significant as it is, there can be other shocks that can unsettle it. So for example, if there's a renewal of conflict between India and Pakistan, what does that do? Does that unsettle the relationship? If the Chinese and the Pakistanis increase pressure on the line of control, what does that do? And so while focusing on how important this week is, this is only the start of an ongoing process, both on specific issues and on wider developments in the region.
All right. Ambassador Sajjanhar, let me ask you this question. Yes, during this visit, it is the bilateral relationship between the two countries which is in focus, and therefore it is bilateral issues that are going to take center stage. However, I don't think anybody can shy away from the fact that Russia and China are significant factors in this visit and in this India-US relationship. To what extent do you think we should be looking at this new chapter in the India-US relationship through the prism of China and Russia?
Okay, both of them very important entities, as far as, discussions are concerned. As far as China is concerned, we see what the situation is. What the External Affairs Minister has also said that the situation is abnormal. As far as the border is concerned, there is huge military deployment on the Chinese side, and it is, we want status quo ante of April 2020. That apparently doesn't seem to be happening because you would recall that we had Wang Yi when he was the foreign minister of China. He'd come to India last year in March. He said everything is normal on the border. We need to sort of, get back to business as usual. Then we had the Chinese ambassador Sun Weidong. He also went. He also said the same thing. And twice when we had the visit of Xin Gang, the new Chinese foreign minister, he also made this similar noises that we need to put the relationship, put the situation on the border in the right perspective, etc. But India is very concerned as to what the situation on the border is, and it doesn't appear that China is taking India's concern very seriously. So if I were to look at the situation right now, I think India has concerns with China. United States also has very significant concerns with China, not only in the economic and technological field, but also as far as the issue of Taiwan and South China Sea is concerned. So I think in that context, and if the United States is not willing to decouple, it is at least willing to de-risk. And in that context, it will try to see that, many of the supply chains will come to India, meaning in terms, it'll be a China plus sort of a policy, not, movement of any of this or any fresh investments coming in. And that, as much as they can come to India, that will be good. And in that context, I think it is the push to semiconductor manufacture in India, chip manufacture, and many of the other areas, whether it is green energy, climate change, 4G, 5G, artificial intelligence, and all the other areas, space, cybersecurity, etc. So I think there we will definitely see much greater energy. And of course, we've spoken about the G414 and, some of the other technologies in the defense sector. So I can foresee that that should definitely go along, on more or less expected lines. There might be a few hiccups here and there. Now, as far as Russia is concerned, Neha, that also is a very important relationship for us on two accounts. I'll not put on energy at the moment because that is, that's not going to last forever. That's not going to last for very long. So two issues are, one is how Russia is used by India to balance China in some way or the other. So it doesn't want to spoil its relations. And then, of course, in terms of the supply of the defense equipment. Now, in both these accounts, I feel that the utility of Russia will continue to come down with the passage of time. And, India will be forced to look more and more closely at the United States to enhance its relationship. Meaning, what is it that India is looking for at the moment? India today is looking for, in terms of growth of its economy, becoming a stronger global economic player. And who can help India in that context? It is only America. China can, of course, will not do it. Russia also neither has the capital nor has the technology. And we, the United States today is India's largest trading partner, $192 billion. And of course, both the countries have been talking about taking it to $500 billion. That might be by 2025, that might be an aspirational figure, but definitely that is out there, and both the sides will strive to get to it. But, there is much investment that is taking place, both sides, from US to India and from India to US. So I think in that context, and you look at the sort of relations that Prime Minister Modi has developed with President Joe Biden, not only what is happening today, what we are seeing in Washington, D.C., but you look at the last few months, whether both the leaders meet in Hiroshima on the sidelines of G7 or on the sidelines of the Quad, or you may see them meeting on the sidelines of the G20 Bali summit last year in November, or in COP26 in Glasgow, or in G7 in Elmau in Germany. The body language and the comfort level and the rapport that the two leaders enjoy and the frequency with which they meet, Neha, I think that tells you what is the importance that both leaders attach to this relationship. As compared to that, you see how often Prime Minister Modi has interacted or met Putin only once in Samarkand last year. And even this time, when there was a possibility for the SCO summit, that has also been turned virtual.
So and even when he did meet President Putin, his words of advice were, this is not an era of war.
Yes, you're right. So, let me, this has become rather long. I didn't want it to be so long, but, you asked these two important questions, and I think it is fair to deal with them at some length, because they are important issues that we will continue to grapple with as we go forward. So the final point here is, I think there is much more, I think with the passage of time, India will continue to grow increasingly closer to the United States, because that is what, today it is not only the value systems that both the leaders spoke about on the, South Lawns of the White House, but it is also interests, and interests are also very wide-ranging. You did mention that President Biden said that it is, I don't know whether he said it is a defining partnership or the defining partnership, but even when Barack Obama had come to India in 2010 in August, if I remember correctly, then he had also mentioned that the India-US relationship is going to be a defining partnership of the 21st century. And of course, President Biden, in his conversation with Prime Minister Modi last year in May 2022 on the sidelines of the Quad Summit in Tokyo, he had said that I would like to see the relationship between these two countries as the best in the world. So I think these are strong words, and even Prime Minister Modi had said that he looks upon this as a partnership of trust. So from both sides, I think the statements have been rather, high on the sentiments. And of course, we'll need to see how the discussions today, help to take them forward.
Absolutely. There is no doubt that a lot of importance is being attached to this visit. President Biden has said that this is going to be a defining relationship of the 21st century. But as they say, God is in the details. So we'll have to wait and see, once these bilateral talks are over, what kind of details emerge. The joint statement that's issued, we'll have to wait and see what's announced. But of course, clearly, there are some big ticket deals that are on the cards. One announcement has already been made. Many more announcements are expected in the course of the next few hours. We'll get into those specifics in a moment. But Professor Lucas, let me come back to you at this point. And since we have dwelt, in some detail on the issues of Russia and China, let me ask you this about China. Fact of the matter is that in the current geopolitical scenario, what's happening is that you have these two global poles, the United States and China, whose economies are intertwined. This is not like the Cold War era. This is not like the United States and Soviet Union of yore. But at the same time, there is this great power rivalry. There are some who believe that that is exactly where the sweet spot for India lies. Do you agree with that? And how do you think India can leverage it best?
I'm sorry, but I don't think you should ever start from the standpoint that you try to exploit conflict because you can risk getting burned by that conflict as it spreads. And we saw that happen to a lot of countries in the Cold War who thought maybe they could play off the Soviet Union against the United States. I think instead the profit, and this is what you're seeing, I think, from this visit today, is in saying, all right, how can we benefit without a situation where conflict escalates? So to give you a couple of examples, I think as we've talked about here, the question of where Asia goes forward in a way which is not one where you have open conflict between China and India or between China and other Asian states, where if China wants to develop its own economic system, fair enough, but that India has the space to pursue its own economic autonomy. That's what you're really talking about here when you talk about issues like AI, like technology, like transport, like manufacturing, even on the issue of visas, to allow professional individuals to be able to move more freely. But let me add a second dimension to this, and that is one of the other problems with trying to say, oh, we'll lever the great power competition between China and the United States is there are other players here. So, for example, consider the European Union. One reason why China has backed away from support of Moscow over the Ukraine conflict, and one reason why I think it is backing away to an extent from the threats over Taiwan, is because they need this investment deal with Europe, which has been stalled for years. And so therefore, the Chinese are making more and more approaches to Europe to say, look, we don't have to fight, we can cooperate. Well, similarly, India can value that relationship with the United States, but when you've got the European Union as this important economic bloc, then you see, for example, the Modi visit to France, and there will be visits to other European countries, which is how do we benefit from a situation which does not end in conflict? Now, again, there can be all types of tensions that suddenly flare up. There can be regional tensions. There can be tensions on India's borders. There can even be a flare up of domestic tensions inside India. But the whole point is to try to avoid those tensions from getting in the way of the progress that you seek. That's what today will be a symbol of. Now, does it actually play out where you get not only the military cooperation, but the economic and the social cooperation, not only between India and the United States, but involving other countries, where the sweet spot is that everybody benefits? It's not a win-lose situation, but a win-win situation.
I agree with you. It doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. Diplomacy is never a zero-sum game. And I think India has always made it abundantly clear, and this was pointed out by Suhasini earlier, that it does not want to get caught in this great power rivalry. Let me go back to Ambassador Sajanhar at this point. Ambassador Sajanhar, what we know so far is that GE and Hindustan Aeronautics Limited have already signed an MOU for what is being described as a game-changing, deal for the joint manufacture of fighter jet engines in India. And what makes this game-changing is the fact that there's going to be a transfer of technology at this level for the very first time between India and the United States. Apart from that, it is widely expected that the $3.5 billion Predator drone deal will go through. Then Prime Minister Modi himself has invited semiconductor major Micron to come to India and invest in setting up a manufacturing unit here. That deal is likely to be announced. In fact, the Indian cabinet has already cleared a 22,000 crore rupee proposal in that direction. We're told that India is going to join the Artemis Accords. That is, of course, a US-led effort to send humans back to the moon by 2025. And we are given to understand that new H-1B visa processing changes are going to be announced and the two countries are going to set up new consulates. Those are some of the details that we have picked up so far. Of course, we'll have to wait and see what happens at the end of these talks, especially when that joint statement is issued. But really, as far as the big ticket items and the key takeaways are concerned, what are your expectations?
I think, Neha, basically on lines similar to what you have said, basically in terms of the transfer of technology for the GF414 jet engines and so on and so forth. You are very right, that these discussions have been going on for quite some time. But I think and there have been sort of, some doubts that have been expressed that, whether if it didn't happen earlier, if it didn't happen last time, what is the guarantee, what is the surety that it is going to happen this time? And I think there are a number of reasons for that. India has sort of, signed all these foundational agreements. India has been designated as a major defense partner by the United States. India has also been, put into the category of STA 1, Strategic Trade Authorization 1, category, which is a very special category, and very few countries are part of that, so that very many approvals from the Congress or other agencies are not required before transferring sensitive technology and so on and so forth. So I am quite hopeful. Basically, the way I look at it is that all these agreements and arrangements that you mentioned, whether it is this transfer of technology for the jet engines, or transfer of drones to India, the Predator drones, or semiconductor, or AI, or 5G, 6G, or green energy, or space, etc. I think all those are win-win solutions, win-win positions for both the United States and India, because India wants to become, maintain its strategic autonomy, of course, and wants to become stronger, both in terms of its defense capabilities, as also a stronger economic power, get more of the supply chains that are currently being controlled by China. And that is also in the interest of the United States. And the United States, as whatever little I was able to overhear, from your earlier discussion, United States has also realized that a stronger, a more confident India will be in a position, without a conflict taking place between either the United States or China, or India and China. It will be in a much better position, much stronger position to deter China from taking any adventurous move against Taiwan, or in the South China Sea. At least it will serve as a strong deterrent. So it is going to be in the interest of both the countries to work together to make India into a much stronger and a more self-confident power. So I would, go with what your thinking is, what you have been able to find out so far as to what the outcome is going to be. But I think there are going to be more details that will become available as we go along. But what I'm really looking forward to also, meaning the last comment I'll make here, is to listen to the address by the Prime Minister to the joint session of the US Congress, because I think that's going to be, he'll try to lay out the direction of the future of the relationship between the two countries. I was thinking that he might give some indication in his brief address at the White House, but he decided not to do that. I think he possibly wanted to save all the firepower for,
You're right, because many felt that President Biden's statement on the South lawns of the White House was far more detailed. Prime Minister Modi's statement was brief, and probably, you're right, that has to do with the fact that he is going to deliver that historic address to a joint session of the US Congress, the first Indian leader to do that twice. Last time, of course, he did it back in 2016, and parallels have also been drawn with how very few world leaders have actually had the honor to do this, leaders including Nelson Mandela and Winston Churchill. Professor Scott Lucas, before we let you go, I want to ask you a quick question about this entire issue of transfer of technology, because it is so critical. Number one, to India's armed forces, and two, to the future of this bilateral relationship. For a decade, talks in a sense was stalled, didn't go anywhere, but now finally this breakthrough has been achieved. It's being called a game changer. The fact that America, it's being said, has never shared this kind of sensitive technology with a non-ally in the past. It describes it as the crown jewel of its defense capabilities. How significant do you think this is for, what is being described as an inflection point in the India-US relationship, the fact that we are going to finally address and get rid of this thorny issue and have transfer of technology between the two countries?
I think you know the answer to that. I think this is part of that inflection point that the ambassador is talking about. It's important in terms of the specifics to which you could use the technology, to which you could use military technology, which we've referred to already in terms of aerial power, in terms of naval power. It's important in terms of transfer of technology, in terms of what you can do in terms of developing your economy. It is important when you talk about the area of cyber and where we go both with cyber opportunities and cyber defense. But there's a broader importance to the transfer of technology, which is it builds up institutional relationships. One of the big differences between the US and India and the US and other powers has simply been that, for example, we've had NATO since 1949. So when it comes to issues of security around the transfer of technology, when it comes to protocols for how technology is used, you're talking about almost 75 years where the United States has had institutional experience with other militaries, with other diplomatic services around those issues. And even though the US and India in some respects, for example, between their diplomatic services have worked closely together, you haven't really had the institutional foundation that you've had within NATO or that you've had with other US European organizations. Now you're beginning to build that up. You had the potential in 2005 and in the 2013 agreements, but now you're going to get specific agreements over the transfer of technology. And what's important is what the protocols are, how the militaries cooperate over this, how the diplomatic services cooperate over this, and how the economic agencies cooperate over it. So in a sense, while we're focusing quite rightly on Modi and Biden today, the longer term issue will be, because presidents can change, prime ministers can change, it'll be the institutional relationships that are built up between Delhi and Washington, which are linked to transfer of technology, that will have lasting significance.
This will most certainly have lasting significance. This will build on institutional relationship. That is, of course, a very significant point you're making there, Professor Scott Lucas. On that note, thank you very much for joining us and sharing your time and perspective with us on this crucial story on a day when we are really witnessing a moment in history. Let me now also welcome Ambassador Manju Seth, former diplomat, who joins us on the show. Welcome, ma'am. Let me begin by asking you, going by everything that you've heard the two leaders say so far, of course, Prime Minister Modi made a rather brief statement where he said that the grand welcome he's received at the White House is an honor for 140 crore Indians. But President Biden made a more detailed statement. He talked about the Quad, he talked about ISET, and most significantly, he said that these are two great nations, two great friends, two great powers, and the India-US relationship will define the 21st century. How significant and how historic do you believe this visit is? And, keeping aside all cynicism that, in a sense, has usually been associated with such high-profile state visits in the past, do you believe that this, visit is going to be a real game changer in terms of some of the deals that are expected to be announced?
Absolutely. I believe this is a very significant visit and will be a game changer in many ways. Because even though our Prime Minister's speech was much more, briefer, but we saw the atmospherics this morning at the White House, and I think that has shown that India as a rising or an ascendant global power, and US as the number one power are coming together to collaborate on key issues of mutual interest, mutual convergence, which can be game changers, not only for both the countries, but also, I think, for the world. Because they are looking at, even there's been talk of regulatory frameworks for AI. There's been talk of transfer of technology, as we just heard the professor say, but it be sensitive, and the sensitivities involved and the security aspects, all that will, of course, be ensured. Like it was during the nuclear deal as well. And then also we had heard the skepticism that whether it would happen or not on the ground, it was only being spoken about. But yes, I believe that this time it is going to be translated. It will be, there will be technology transfer, but to what extent, of course, remains to be seen. But definitely on the ground, I believe there will be change. We are already witnessing the beginning of that change in the relationship. It has been long in the making. That we've been seeing how it's been strengthening over the years. But this time, and I think we're at the right place and at the right moment in history, let me put it that way, and at the right moment it's the right time for the bilateral relationship to be taken to the next level. And I think it will be definitely a game changer. The inflection point, as you mentioned, is very much visible, and we will see further that the two democracies of the world will make things happen, make things change. And I think across the board, it'll be in climate change, in space already there has been an agreement that they will send a joint astronaut, a joint trip. And there's also talk of AI working on AI together for the startups and innovation startups to be sort of this talk of co-location, working together. So I think in every area there is talk of collaboration and making it happen, and transfer of technology, which is very crucial for us, and make in India. The Atmanirbhar Bharat that we've been talking about, that we need to make in India, we need to be self-sufficient, and also the being part of the universal global supply chains in key areas, or like semiconductors, etc., because we saw the disruption that took place. So I think this is a very important and significant visit, which is the harbinger of good, I think, for both countries, and I believe, though it sounds a little bombastic to say, for the world as well.
Well, you're right, because the world is watching this visit with great interest. I really wonder what Beijing and Moscow might have to say about this. But let me go back to Ambassador Sajanhar at this point. Ambassador, what we are told is that once the bilateral talks between the two sides are over, there's going to be a joint statement, and interestingly, the two leaders are going to address a press conference of sorts where both of them are going to take two questions each from the reporters present in the room. Of course, we are waiting to find out what kind of deals are going to be struck, and we'll have to see, for example, the degree of transfer of technology that's going to actually be announced as part of the F414 fighter jet engine deal. But what would your expectation be, Ambassador Sajanhar, as these talks go on? What do you think are likely to be some big ticket announcements that are going to happen tonight?
Yeah, so, before coming to your question, responding to your question, you mentioned as to what China would be thinking about and what Russia would be thinking about as far as the visit is concerned. I'm sure you have seen the piece, the opinion piece by Wang Yi, meaning now he is no longer the foreign minister. He's he's become more senior than that in terms of determining the foreign policy of China. And he's written a piece in the Global Times, and he has very severely castigated the United States for trying to wean away India and to try to sow discord between India and China, and trying to help India to replace China as in terms of the supply chains that have been coming out, and he has threatened and warned that this is not going to succeed. So obviously you can see that, meaning the pieces in Global Times from the editor of the Global Times are, par for the course. They are there every day on these similar subjects. But for Wang Yi himself to take up the pen and to write this piece, criticizing the increasing cooperation and friendship and partnership between India and the United States, does speak volumes that it is making making China extremely worried and extremely nervous. So I think that should give some hope and encouragement to both India and the United States that they need to work, do everything that is possible, work overtime to make things succeed. Now, as far as, coming to your question as to what the deals that are going to come out. I think we've been talking about that in your program, and I think for the time being, that is all one can say in terms of information that is reasonably available, whether it is the jet engines, whether it is semiconductor, whether it is joining the Artemis Accords, or it is sending a man into space in 2024, or it is the Predator drones, and some of the other issues that have come up. But we'll really have to wait and see. I think the exact import, in my view, Neha, will not become evident and obvious for quite some days. I think the experts and those who are well versed in matters of this nature will have to pore over the agreements and parse all the details and find out what the import, what the significance, what could be possibly the hiccups or the bottlenecks in terms of completion. But I think what I can see from all that has been happening and all that is being said, whether it is the visit of NSA Ajit Doval to Washington D.C. in January this year, and the back-to-back visits of Lloyd Austin and Jake Sullivan to India, and speaking about the transfer of technology. I think both the sides are investing considerable effort and energy into the relationship, and I'm sure it would be their intent that whatever comes out is significant, is substantive, is substantial, and it shouldn't make people say that it turned out to be a damn squib. So I don't think it is going to be a damn squib. I think it's going to be give a lot of energy to the relationship, give a lot of momentum to the relationship in all these areas that we have been speaking about. And I'm sure there'll be more than what we have been discussing in these programs.
Absolutely. Ambassador Manju said it cannot, by any stretch of imagination, be a damn squib if you're going to, for the very first time, in the history of this bilateral relationship, actually have technology transfer. This has been a very sensitive, a very thorny issue in this relationship, but all that is set to change. There is talk of this technology transfer being to the tune of 80 to even 100%. This is going to be game-changing for India's armed forces, for its defense capabilities, and therefore for the India-US relationship. Many believe that the fact that the US has never been willing to do it before with any non-ally and is now doing it for India means that it obviously attaches a lot of significance to this bilateral relationship. Apart from that, of course, we're talking about the big Predator drone deal that is expected to be inked by the two sides, the semiconductor deal. The Prime Minister has already invited Micron, the chip maker company, to invest in India, set up a plant here. We are set to join the Artemis Accords. There is talk about, the visa issue. I wonder if you'd want to comment on that. These are some of the big ticket items that are on the agenda, and we are perhaps likely to see some big announcements being made by the two sides at the end of these talks.
Absolutely, we will. As you mentioned, all these areas are definitely on the table, and there will be announcements made at the end of the visit. As far as the visa issue is concerned, I think there's also been a big backlog, and we have been raising it up with them especially for the H-1B visas, etc. We have spoken about it a number of times at all possible levels in the past, and I think we will continue to do that. And already we have seen today there was an announcement that it will be facilitated. There'll be more H-1B visas given easily. And whenever we have these negotiations, also we've been talking of free movement or freer movement or facilitation of movement of our professionals, especially those who are from the IT sector. So we have to remember that these issues were sticking points. Many of these issues, including visas and some of our, movement of our professionals was a problem. So that is set to be resolved, and I think that is again a positive step, a positive development. And all this, I think, has become possible because the US recognizes that its, collaboration or its partnership with India is important and in its interest as well. If you see, he even called it a defining moment. So I think a defining moment when you give it, I mean, of course, part of it is, its language, but it is also sending out a message that the importance that they give to this relationship, that the US gives to this relationship with India, is set to, to change things and facilitate, including, technology transfer and these bilateral projects. As I mentioned earlier, also in AI, in telecom, I'm sorry, in the chips, microchips, and in all these, sort of areas, there will be a change taking place. We will be seeing it, and for the positive, absolutely for the positive. And I think we need to remember that it is in both, in the interest of both the US and in the interest of India. Then only will this relationship, flourish. And that moment, I think, as I mentioned, is now. And defense cooperation, semiconductors, everything, space, everything is on the table. All aspects of the relationship, of technology, is on the table. And I think that is an important development and will be a game changer for the relationship.
Absolutely, everything is on the table, and it's not just hype and hoopla. The outcomes are expected to be substantive in many ways. On that note, let me in fact welcome our next guest. We are joined by Indrani Bagchi, foreign policy commentator and CEO, Ananta Aspen Center. Indrani, welcome to the show. You know, we're talking about some of the big ticket items that could end up dominating this state visit by Prime Minister Modi to the United States. We are talking about this $3.5 billion Predator drone deal. There is talk about how Micron is going to set up a semiconductor manufacturing plant in India. We're talking about how the visa issue is going to be addressed. India is going to join the Artemis Accords. And the biggest talking point clearly has been the deal between General Electric and Hindustan Aeronautics. It's being called a game changer for India's armed forces and for the relationship. The fighter jet engine deal and the fact that it comes with transfer of technology, something that's never happened before in the history of this relationship. Do you believe that yes, this is indeed going to be a game changer and this is going to in fact redefine the India-US relationship? How do you see this visit, and how do you see the myriad deals that are on the cards?
Hi, Neha. Thank you for having me on your show. Certainly, this is actually one of the most important visits that an Indian Prime Minister has made to the US. And Indian Prime Ministers have visited US with steady regularity. We've had big deals before, the nuclear deal, etc. But this is a different order. And as you said, the crown jewel of US defense production, which is the jet engine deal. If we can see a steady transfer of technology, but just the very fact that that jet engines will be manufactured in India is a huge game changer. Because if you look at what are the implications of this deal, of the GE 414? If you look at the MOU between GE and HAL that was released today, you are looking at a fact that in about 10 years' time, about 75 to 80% of India's fighter aircraft will be powered by US engines, US jet engines. That is a huge shift. It's a massive shift. it's something that we would not have, when a few years ago, we would not have actually imagined that that could have been achieved, but it has, and that is the big part of this deal. The Predator drones, they've been in negotiations for a while, but what they will do is increase our ability to on maritime domain awareness, as well as on the land domain awareness, especially on the Himalayas, on the Chinese border. But look at it slightly differently as well. That with the Predator, all the Quad countries have interoperable ISR systems, which is satellite reconnaissance systems, and that's also another piece to this entire story, which is how is the India-US relationship part of the bigger Quad relationship, and that is actually if you look at the Quad, the Indo-Pacific, that's really the front and center of Indian foreign policy today. So yeah, it is actually a very, very big deal.
It is a big deal. It is going to be a game changer, like we keep saying, for India's armed forces, for India's defense capabilities, and for the India-US relationship itself, which President Biden today said is going to be a defining partnership of the 21st century. Indrani, I can't help but bring this up. I read your very interesting piece in the Times of India, and this one thing struck me more than any other point. You said, last year India received a lot of flack for refusing to condemn Russia for its invasion of Ukraine and for continuing to import Russian oil. Now the West is probably thanking India for playing the villain, buying Russian oil and saving it from a huge financial crisis. I must say, I smiled, I almost chuckled when I read that. A lot is being also said about how the United States has made its peace with the fact that, this is not going to be a monogamous relationship. India and the US are going to be strong partners, but India is not an ally. It will not be an ally. It will maintain its strategic autonomy. It will maintain those ties with Russia. So even as US makes efforts to wean India off its huge dependence on Russia for weapon supplies, at the same time, there is this sense of resignation that, oil purchases will continue and this long-standing relationship that India and Russia have will continue. So how do you really see, the fact that the US seems to have really, the US stand on this issue seems to have really evolved in the last 1 year?
Look, India did not stop buying Russian oil, and I think, as this was a story actually which I tweeted out this morning as well. This was a story that was in actually Nikkei, which said that India did the world a favor by buying Russian oil, which was something that the Indian government was actually telling the world last year, that we are actually doing you a favor. To be fair, the Americans were the first to realize last year that India was doing them a favor, was doing the world a favor by continuing to buy Russian oil. But let me tell you one thing. There is a strategic autonomy discourse that we are all part of, but there is also a fact that India is voting with its feet. If you look at the deliverables of the Modi visit, it tells you very clearly where India is headed, that if India had to make a choice, India's already made that choice. Yes, we will continue to be friends with Russia because we have a very old relationship there. Yes, we will continue to buy weapons, or energy from Russia. But Russia is no longer the power that it used to be. That may not even have the power to supply us with the kind of weapons that we used to. Besides, if Russia becomes the kind of junior partner to China that we can see that it is becoming, India, for all its love of Russia, will have to disengage in a strategic way, and you can see that disengagement actually happening on the ground by if you just connect the dots in the US visit. India is making a statement that it will never articulate, but it is making a statement by moving substantially in one direction. So, yes, there will be strategic autonomy, but not in the way that we define it today. That definition will change.
Very interesting. You're saying India may not say it publicly, but there is already a shift in its approach. There is already a visible disengagement from Moscow. And, perhaps this is really the long game that the US is willing to play here. They're no longer insisting that we don't buy oil from Russia. They're no longer insisting that we stop buying weapons. What they are doing is, opening more doors for us, willing to share technology with us, and thereby, in a sense, playing the long game of weaning India off its dependence on Russia for weapon supplies. But let's talk about the China factor. You linked Russia to China and the fact that there is this growing relationship between Moscow and Beijing, which perhaps is going to make New Delhi uncomfortable. Fact of the matter is that China itself makes both India and the US uncomfortable. It is a common adversary. In fact, Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor of the US, has already said that Beijing flexing its muscle in the Indo-Pacific is going to come up in these bilateral talks between the two leaders, and China's role in the military, economic and technology domains will be on the agenda when the two leaders meet. Do you believe that the US does see India as a countervailing force against China, and do you believe China is a big factor that's kind of pushed India and the United States into each other's embrace?
Well, that is actually a 20-year-old story. This is it. It was in the early years of the 21st century that India and the US both acknowledged that really the looming challenge, the strategic challenge, is China for both countries. This was also the thinking behind George Bush working out a nuclear deal for India. It has been the thinking behind successive US administrations gradually opening up defense relationships with India. It has been behind successive Indian governments opening up to defense relationships with the US, which we would not have countenanced something like 25 years ago. But the recognition of China as a strategic challenge, you probably do not remember, but when we tested nuclear weapons back in '98, Prime Minister Vajpayee had sent a letter to President Clinton describing China as the reason, one of the biggest reasons why we had to test nuclear weapons, because he described China as a strategic challenge, and that was back in 1998. So the challenge has grown, the recognition of the challenge has grown. But two countries like India and the US, who have been on opposite sides of the Cold War divide, have taken this long to get to know each other, to get into a habit of cooperation, to be much more comfortable with each other. These are two democracies which are very difficult democracies. It's not easy being a democracy. And we have had different histories. To be able to reconcile each with the other, that India will not be an ally, that America will not be the kind of friend that India may want it to be. It has taken all these years for both countries to become more comfortable with each other, to get us to this place of strategic comfort. That did not happen overnight. It happened over a couple of decades. And it happened because the world has been changing quite significantly in the last couple of decades.
That is very interesting. I mean, this is clearly not an overnight development. It is clear that China's growing aggression in the Indo-Pacific and its expansionism, its revisionism are matters of concern for perhaps the international community at large, and in particular for India and the United States. It is no secret that Quad has emerged as the response of the international community, in a sense, to China's growing hegemony. But that apart, it's very interesting, Indrani. We've had some foreign policy commentators on this channel in recent days who've said that yes, ties between China and the US are quite strained. We also saw how soon after Antony Blinken's visit to Beijing, President Biden called Xi a dictator. Clearly, Beijing is not amused and they've reacted very angrily. But fact is that the two sides have also agreed that they will continue to meet and continue to talk. Therefore, some of our guests in recent days have said that when Prime Minister Modi and President Biden are going to be in that room together, it will be a good idea for India to seek some clarity from the US on how far it actually wants to go in making amends in its ties with China. Do you believe this should be a matter of concern to India?
Yeah, I've actually, well, not a matter of concern as such, but certainly a matter that we would ask for clarification. In fact, I think I wrote that in my piece today, that that it's something that India would ask.
I may have subliminally quoted you there, Indrani. My apologies for not mentioning the article in this context. But why do you think this is important? If you could put this into perspective for our viewers, why is this important?
Again, you know, see, you must understand the asymmetry between India and America. I mean, we are not symmetrical partners. America is a superpower. We are at $3 trillion. We are still at a per capita GDP of $2,000. On two occasions, certainly in the last 24 years, US presidents have been making up with China to say that there is this thing called a G2. Let us be a G2, and you know, we can both be sort of monitors of the world order. That makes India very apprehensive. It hasn't happened, and I personally don't think that it will happen. But that memory, it remains in the Indian system, and therefore, my view, I think the Indians will be asking for some clarity on that fact.
That is interesting. Let's see what emerges from these bilateral talks. Final question, Indrani, before we let you go. Jake Sullivan has said that, yes, President Biden is going to take up with Prime Minister Modi the issue of quote-unquote democratic backsliding in India. But he added that Biden is not going to lecture Modi on the subject. This is an elephant in the room, isn't it? How do you think the two sides are likely to address it?
Look, I don't think we have such a poor case at all. The core of democracy, and I've maintained this for a while, all democracies are imperfect. All democracies are flawed. I mean, America is the oldest democracy. We may be the largest democracy, but America is a flawed democracy. So are we, and I think you will now find that recognition in the upper echelons of the U.S. system. This kind of a conversation, yes, and I think Prime Minister Modi should be able to explain where India comes from. Frankly, if you look at it, in its core, what is democracy? The fact that you have free and fair elections, that you have a smooth transfer of power, that in the state wealth, where the state is concerned, and the state welfare, say the state welfare systems, you are not discriminating on the basis of religion. I think that's a pretty good set of values that we carry as democracies. As for what they have called democratic backsliding, which is the kind of the aggressive Hindu outlook and an aggressive Hindu approach to other communities in India, my personal sense is I think Prime Minister Modi will have a pretty good defense to offer. If you've seen, Foreign Minister Jaishankar has been fairly open and fairly comprehensive in his own explanations. Having said all of this, I don't think he will be able to convince everybody, but I don't think that's his intention. If we remain a stable, steady democracy, following the values that we come with, we will be fine. We are a nation of 1.4 billion people. We are a civilizational state. There will be the odd incident. There will be strains between in a multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-religious society. There will be strains. As long as we have a peaceful way of resolving those strains or resolving those problems, we'll be fine.
You're quite right. Democracies are works in progress after all. There is no perfect model. The United States is not a perfect democracy, neither is India. But on that note, Indrani Bagchi, an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for your time and perspective on this big day.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right. So as talks continue between President Biden and Prime Minister Narendra Modi at the White House, let's listen in once again to what the two leaders said when the ceremonial welcome was being accorded to Prime Minister Modi on the South Lawns of the White House.
Friends, करीब 3 दशक पहले एक साधारण नागरिक के रूप में मैं अमेरिका यात्रा पर आया था और उस समय मैंने व्हाइट हाउस को बाहर से देखा था। प्रधानमंत्री बनने के बाद तो मैं स्वयं तो कई बार यहां पर आया हूं, लेकिन इतनी बड़ी संख्या में इंडियन अमेरिकन समुदाय के लिए व्हाइट हाउस के द्वार आज पहली बार खोले गए हैं। भारतीय समुदाय के लोग अपने टैलेंट, कर्मठता और निष्ठा से अमेरिका में भारत की शान बढ़ा रहे हैं। आप सब हमारे संबंधों की असली ताकत है। आज आपको दिए गए सम्मान के लिए मैं राष्ट्रपति बाइडेन और डॉक्टर जिल बाइडेन का हृदय से अभिनंदन करता हूं। उनका जितना धन्यवाद करूं उतना कम है। मैं यही कामना करता हूं और 140 करोड़ भारतवासी भी यही कामना करते हैं कि भारत का तिरंगा और अमेरिका का स्टार एंड स्ट्राइप हमेशा नई ऊंचाइयां छूते रहे। राष्ट्रपति बाइडेन, डॉक्टर जिल बाइडेन एक बार फिर आपके स्नेह भरे निमंत्रण के लिए, आपके गर्मजोशी भरे स्वागत और आतिथ्य सत्कार के लिए मैं आपका और 140 करोड़ हिंदुस्तान वासियों की तरफ से आभार प्रकट करता हूं। जय हिंद। गॉड ब्लेस अमेरिका। पोस्ट कोविड काल में वर्ल्ड ऑर्डर एक नया रूप ले रहा है। इस कालखंड में भारत और अमेरिका की मित्रता पूरे विश्व के सामर्थ्य को बढ़ाने में पूरक होगी। ग्लोबल गुड के लिए वैश्विक शांति, स्थिरता और समृद्धि के लिए दोनों देश साथ मिलकर काम करने के लिए प्रतिबद्ध है। हमारी मजबूत स्ट्रेटेजिक पार्टनरशिप डेमोक्रेसी की ताकत का स्पष्ट प्रमाण है। फ्रेंड्स, आज व्हाइट हाउस में शानदार स्वागत समारोह के एक प्रकार से ये भारत के 140 करोड़ देशवासियों का सम्मान है, 140 करोड़ देशवासियों का गौरव है। ये सम्मान अमेरिका में रहने वाले 4 मिलियन से अधिक भारतीय मूल के लोगों का भी सम्मान है। इस सम्मान के लिए मैं राष्ट्रपति बाइडेन और डॉक्टर जिल बाइडेन का उनके प्रति हृदय से बहुत बहुत आभार व्यक्त करता हूं। राष्ट्रपति बाइडेन, फर्स्ट लेडी डॉक्टर जिल बाइडेन, डिस्टिंग्विश्ड गेस्ट, उमंग और उत्साह से भरे हुए इंडियन अमेरिकन मेरे प्यारे साथियों, आप सबको नमस्कार। सबसे पहले तो मैं राष्ट्रपति बाइडेन के मित्रतापूर्ण स्वागत और दीर्घ दृष्टिपूर्ण संबोधन के लिए उनका हृदय से बहुत बहुत आभार व्यक्त करता हूं। थैंक यू, प्रेसिडेंट बाइडेन, for your friendship.
Welcome, Mr. Prime Minister. Welcome back to the White House. I've long believed that the relationship between the United States and India is will be one of the defining relationships of the 21st century. Two proud nations whose love of freedom secured our independence, bound by the same words in our Constitution. First 3 words, we the people. The enduring ties and shared values between our people and the shared responsibility as global leaders to tackle the great issues of our time together.
China won't let us rest easy on our borders, but they will keep flooding our markets. What does Xi Jinping really want?
I think he wants the Indian market, no doubt about it. It's really a matter of showing their dominance.
India's great Chinese conundrum.
Nobody can contain it. Not the United States.